You ever notice how the people who seem to understand themselves the deepest are often the quietest online? Not because they're antisocial, not because they don't care, but because something in their brain rejects the entire premise of what social media was designed to do. This isn't about digital detox trends or screen time guilt. This is about a fundamental mismatch between how self-aware minds process reality and how social platforms are engineered to capture attention. And from my perspective, once you see this mismatch clearly, you can't unsee it. Let me start with something most people don't talk about. When you post something online, your brain doesn't just share information. It performs an identity. There's a 2019 study from Cornell University that found something fascinating. See, when people curate their social media presence, they're not expressing who they are. They're constructing who they want to be perceived as. The brain treats this like a theater rehearsal. You're not living, you're directing. And here's where it gets strange. For most people, this feels natural, even rewarding. The dopamine hit from a like, a comment, a share, it validates the performance. The brain says, good. They believe the character you played. But highly self-aware people experience this differently. Because self-awareness isn't just knowing your strengths and flaws. It's the ability to observe your own mind in real time, to catch yourself mid-thought and ask, wait, why am I thinking this? What am I performing right now? And for whom? I've noticed that once you develop this level of internal observation, social media starts to feel exhausting. Not because you're judging others, but because you're watching yourself perform and you can't stop noticing the gap between the performance and the truth. Let's talk about the brain for a second. Self-awareness is largely governed by a region called the medial prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that lights up when you think about yourself, your values, your narrative. It's your internal narrator. But here's the thing. This same region is responsible for something called self-referential processing. That means it's constantly filtering the world through the lens of, what does this mean for me? How does this fit into my identity? When you scroll through social media, this system goes into overdrive. Every post, every image, every opinion becomes a mirror. Your brain is constantly comparing, contrasting, updating its sense of who you are in relation to everyone else. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania found in 2018 that even passive scrolling increases activity in this self-referential network. For someone with low self-awareness, this feels normal, maybe even comforting. The feed gives them clues about who to be. But for someone with high self-awareness, it feels like being trapped in a hall of mirrors. Every reflection is distorted. Every comparison is a cognitive tax. And worst of all, you see the distortion happening in real time. There's another layer to this. Social media is built on what behavioral scientists call intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. You don't know when the reward is coming, so your brain keeps checking, searching, hoping. A 2017 study from UCLA showed that when teenagers see a photo with a lot of likes, their nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward center, lights up the same way it does with chocolate or money. But here's what I've come to believe. Highly self-aware people aren't immune to this. They feel the pull just as strongly. The difference is they notice the pull. They see the craving forming. And that awareness creates friction. It's like watching yourself reach for junk food while simultaneously knowing exactly why you're reaching for it. The desire doesn't go away, but the unconscious pleasure does. And when you strip the unconscious pleasure from social media, all that's left is the mechanism, the raw engineered manipulation. And once you see it, it's hard to participate without feeling complicit in your own distraction. Let me take this deeper. Human beings evolved in small tribes, 50 to 150 people, max. Your brain developed social instincts for that scale. You knew everyone's face, their reputation, their role. Trust was built slowly through repeated interaction. Now you're being asked to maintain a social presence for hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people, most of whom you've never met, note of whom you'll never meet, and your brain, specifically your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, can't handle this scale. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar famously proposed that humans can only maintain about 150 stable relationships. Anything beyond that, and your brain starts taking shortcuts. It stops seeing individuals. It starts seeing categories. Audiences, crowds. For highly self-aware people, this creates a deep dissonance, because when you're self-aware, you know that your internal experience is nuanced, contradictory, constantly shifting. You contain multitudes. But social media demands simplicity. It demands a brand, a vibe, a consistent character, and from my perspective, the more accurately you see yourself, the harder it becomes to reduce yourself to something that fits in a bio. There's something else happening here that doesn't get enough attention. Oxytocin. Most people think of oxytocin as the love hormone. It gets released during bonding, during physical touch, during deep connection. But oxytocin also does something less talked about. It enhances in-group loyalty and out-group suspicion. A 2010 study from the University of Amsterdam found that oxytocin actually increases ethnocentrism and defensive aggression toward outsiders. Now think about social media. Every time you engage with your feed, your brain is forming micro-tribes. People who agree with you, people who validate you. And on the flip side, people who challenge you become threats, not intellectual opponents. Emotional threats. Your brain doesn't care about truth. It cares about belonging. And I've noticed that highly self-aware people become acutely aware of this tribal instinct in themselves. They catch themselves villainizing people they disagree with. They notice the rush of righteousness when they're right. They feel the pull toward echo chambers, and instead of leaning in, they step back, not because they're better, but because they see the trap, and they'd rather be uncertain and honest than certain and performed. Here's where it gets paradoxical. You'd think self-aware people would use social media to express their authentic selves, right? To share their real thoughts, unfiltered. But the opposite happens, because authenticity online isn't actually authentic. When you're typing out a vulnerable post, you're not spontaneous. You're editing. You're choosing words. You're imagining the audience. Even your raw thoughts are being shaped by the knowledge that someone will see them. A 2020 study from Stanford found that people who try to be authentic on social media actually report feeling more alienated from themselves, not less. And this makes sense. True authenticity happens in the unobserved moment, in the conversation with no record, in the thought you don't perform for anyone, not even yourself. Social media removes that privacy. It turns even your vulnerability into content. And once you see that, it's hard to post anything without feeling like you're betraying the very self you're trying to express. Let's talk about meaning for a second. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that meaning comes not from comfort, but from choosing how we respond to life. He believed the human brain is wired to seek purpose, not pleasure. And I think this is why highly self-aware people struggle with social media. Because scrolling doesn't create meaning, it creates stimulation. And there's a difference. Stimulation. And there's a difference. Stimulation is passive, reactive. It fills time but drains energy. Meaning, on the other hand, is active, chosen. It costs energy up front but replenishes something deeper. When you're self-aware, you become sensitive to this distinction. You start to notice when you're numbing versus when you're living. And social media, for all its connection, often feels like numbing. Not always, not for everyone, but often enough that the friction builds. So here's what I've come to understand. Highly self-aware people don't avoid social media because they're superior or enlightened. They avoid it because their internal wiring creates a mismatch with the platform's design. They notice the performance. They see the manipulation. They feel the tribal instincts. They sense the emptiness behind the stimulation, and once you see all of that, participation feels less like connection and more like compromise. But here's the beautiful part. If this describes you, you're not broken. You're not missing out. You're just built to prioritize depth over breadth, presence over performance, internal truth over external validation. And in a world that's optimized for noise, that might be the rarest form of clarity. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Not in the comments, though you're welcome to, but internally, in that quiet space where you know what's true before you perform it.